So if you have a small studio space, or you're just starting out with studio photography, not sure what setups you can work through, then maybe this is a video for you. I got a really specific request on my TikTok the other day that was like, the setups are good, but what can I do with a small studio space? You can also request things on my TikTok, by the way. I do read them all. And you can see some of the images here that we're going to work through. And we'll kind of work through this in order. So the request came in, the width of the room I think was 260, 2.6 meters, which I've got here, 5 meters length, and 2 meters 50 on the height. So pretty small space. And the commenter wanted to know what they could do with it, and we're going to work through some setups. And I don't want people to be put off. Like, studio lighting and photography in general doesn't need to be about what equipment you've got. Obviously that comes into it a little bit, but it shouldn't be like I have to get the latest camera or the latest lights and so on. I really started doing studio photography in my living room, and then I moved to a garage, a rental garage, and then I moved to like 3 garages together, and it just kept building from that. So if you've got any kind of space, you can do something with it. This whole setup is just going to be about utilizing the space. I've made the assumption that we've got 2 lights, but I've got cheap lights, as in they're like 500 watts, so like any kind of light you could get, basically. That's a strobe light. So you can use something that's kind of relatively cheap and easy to find. You could also do some of this with constant lighting, but today this is just focusing on strobe lighting. If you want LED stuff, then let me know in the comments. And I've taken one of the models from a previous setup that I've got, because maybe you can kind of compare the two. The styling and everything is still the same, so you can just look at it and see, okay, what's the difference here in terms of lighting? Dive on into the studio space, spin around it so you can see it's pretty tiny. It's like tight. I don't know what the photographer has in the way of like shelving or cabling or ceiling lights or anything. So I've just taken their basic measurements and used that as it's an empty box. I've also taken a liberty here of, I've made the ceiling, let's just click on it here. I've made the ceiling like a darker gray. Obviously you could have a white ceiling, that's fine, but it's a bit more controllable if it's a dark gray or moving towards a black. Again, just be aware if you're firing lights around, they may kind of bring a bit of a color cast from the light that they're hitting. So that's also something to keep in mind. Try and have fairly neutral colors in your studio space if you can. The walls are white and the floors are white, just a slightly off white. Let's spin around the space, right? So we've got this low ceiling, 2 meters 50, just enough width to get a color armor in there. Start off with something really simple in here. And I've got an Octa, and it's a 120 Octa, and I've got it on 8 power. Just so we know where we are with everything else, let's look at what I've got on the camera. I've got a standard 50mm lens shooting on like a full frame DSLR. Doesn't matter too much about that right now, but I'm on ISO 400. It's kind of important. Aperture is f8, and my shutter speed is 125th of a second. And it will stay that way all the way through. I don't change my ISO. I don't change my aperture because we don't care. It doesn't matter. It's not necessary to do that. It's a studio photography. There's a few things that we can look at with this Octa. So we've got more power if we need to increase the power. The distance from the model, if we look at overhead, is like twice the model's height. And then the camera is situated right at the end wall. So the photographer is going to be a little bit kind of tight up to the wall, but that allows us to shoot on this 50mm lens and get a full length body shot. Obviously you can see I could move the camera in another like half a meter and still get a full length shot on there. The Octa has internal and external diffusion on, so we know from previous stuff that's going to make it really soft. It's angled down a little bit. It's not directly angled at the model, but it's fairly directional towards the model. It's in this small space. Obviously we're going to get some bounce off the wall. We're going to get bounce off the other wall. We would get some bounce off the ceiling, but again, we've got a slightly darker ceiling on here. The model is like, what, 50 centimeters or so from the background. If we look at the off side of the model's face, it is fairly well lit, and that's mostly because that bounce is coming off the other wall and coming back in and filling and evening off the side of the face. Everything is okay. If you just wanted to shoot nice portraits, you could get a nice headshot also like this. And an Octa's really good. It's really soft. What did I say it was? A 120, so it's not like completely taking over the space, but again, you'd have to maneuver a little bit to kind of work out how you'd be with that. Also, the lights are not on stands, so just keep in mind you would need to have a stand in place, I guess, for the light. What I'm going to do also with this is a bit more like a live stream, right? Because I've pre-made everything. I'm just going to talk through how I would actually kind of go about setting these up, or also why it's important to do that. So let's say I want something that's more even or more controllable, right? I could then just have 2 Octas. So again, like this is budget, right? So this is like a 500 watt light, that's cheap. You can have any Octa that fits your light. That could be fairly cheap also. I'll show you other variants, so we won't just use Octas, but we've got 5 power on here and we've got 5 power on here. The thing that's really important, if we spin around from this side of the set and we can see here, I've got no front in the Octa here, so it's just the silver, and no front in the Octa here, just the silver. Camera's in the middle. The Octas are about the same height and the same angle pushing in towards the model. You can just see over here you've got this kind of cross shadow, but that's from the ambient light. When the two lights firing in this small space, they kind of cancel each other out. You're not getting a big shadow into the background. You're getting this really clean and crisp light. It's actually really great for skin tone. It's like a wrap light. It's sort of like using a big ring flash, although not as clearly identifiable as a ring flash. But because it's right either side of the camera, it's like a wraparound quality. Super nice light. There's a documentary photographer, shot some really amazing street portraits with this setup using silver umbrellas. It's kind of a go-to setup. You'll get a lot of bounce off the rest of the wall, so you're kind of filling in everything, so you won't get like really heavy shadow under the chin. You just get a soft shadow. Let's look at those two images side by side. This one has more of a shadow on the side, so this is the Octa on its own, single Octa. And then this is the more wrap light. It's got a real 3D quality to it. Because it's a silver, it's going to do really nice things for the skin tone. It's going to bring everything forward. Look at the vibrancy of like the yellow skirt really comes forward with that silver. Consistency of the light and the shadows on the shoes is much better than it is on just the single Octa. Yeah, you just get a wrap feel. It's nice. So it's a really simple, good setup to work with. Remember, the only thing that's really important with this is that we've got no fronts on the Octas and they're both the same power. In terms of height, 2.11 meters, so they're kind of up close to the ceiling. I want to get as high as possible because I want to shape the face a little bit if I can. It's always just more flattering to do that. Okay, but maybe you can't afford Octas. What could your go-to be then? You could just have these as umbrellas. So I've got silver umbrella. It's 105. Umbrella's probably the cheapest modifier, I guess you could get. Super easy to work with. It's a silver on the inside, not a white, because I'm trying to mimic what the Octa's doing. This is like the cheap version of having an Octa. You get a similar kind of quality with this. I've mounted them at the same height, same angle. Again, it should wrap around the face. And let's just see the difference with those two. So this is the Octa and this is the umbrellas. It's a little heavier. It's a little bit more kind of direct line under the shadow of the chin. Maybe a bit more of a hard edge to the shape of the legs. But everything else is fairly consistent. Again, it's a kind of easy go-to setup. You could do something kind of nice with that. And then let's see what I've changed with this one. Is I've brought the camera forward. And now I'm shooting on an 85mm lens. 85mm lens, everyone knows, super great for portraits. Compresses the face a little bit, really flattering. It's a great lens to work with. Even here, the shadow is quite nice. It's quite flattering. It's fairly soft shadow because even though the light sources are not massive, because they're either side of the camera, we're getting that wraparound quality. The light's bouncing off everything just a little bit, so everything is fairly soft. The other thing also with the catch lights and eyes, the closer you are to the camera, the more you're going to get like one catch light. And then the more you spread the lights away from the camera and angle them, the more you're going to get two catch lights. Catch lights can kind of be distracting, so just be careful what you want to do with that. This is a perfectly like acceptable lighting setup. You can shoot full length, you can shoot nice headshots. This is quite a deep, rich red, right? This is a cherry red, this colorama, but because we're firing all that light into it, it's sort of a pinky red. Now what I can do with this, I'm a big fan of like using polyboards, obviously, negative fill or white polyboards to add bounce. I've just got two polyboards either side. These are like 2.20 meters, so they're like just below the ceiling height. Again, polyboards, you can just go to like a DIY store, get some foam core. Maybe there'll be black ones there, but if not, just paint it. Household paint is fine for that. Tape the edges with some gaffer tape and you'll be okay. Bike stands are really good for holding up polyboards as well. You don't need expensive polyboard holders. You can use other materials, but polyboards are great because you can just move them around, super lightweight. So again, let's look from the top. Angled this, it's a bit of a kind of a V, and I'm just trying to control the spill light. I'm also trying to add a bit of contrast to the face, but mainly I'm not trying to let the light hit all the other sides. And we'll see if we can get any kind of difference. And it's subtle, but obviously we're looking at like a post-production version. If you would shoot this digital and then put post-production into it, you would see a much more noticeable difference. The shadow under the chin, right? It's heavier. There's more contrast, more defining. The off side of the face, away from the camera, that's a little bit heavier. It's a little bit more shaped as well from that black polyboard. You'd also notice around here, like the hair and the shape of the body. You can see this off shoulder here away from the camera. Again, more defined because you've got those black negative fills. Negative fill is really helpful for the space. Obviously, notice it's the edge of my frame here. It's like creeping in, but for a shot like this, we could just Photoshop it out or crop it or whatever. It's fine. We're just trying to add a little bit of shaping, a little bit of contrast to the face. And it works fine with this polyboards. The light's still the same on this, 5.5, 5.5. And obviously this is still the silver umbrellas. Silver umbrellas, I used to hate them, but I think they're a nice go-to. You can do stuff with it. So if we're in that setup, all we're going to do is make little changes along the way. So hopefully you can kind of follow this all the way through. Now I'm going to do is classic. This is kind of like Irving Penn sort of vibe, although he obviously used a gray with that. But there's a psychological trick, I guess, with this, but also it creates a definite space for the person to be in. But suddenly you can transform everything, right? So the background disappears. We're shooting into the negative fill, the black polyboards. And let's just compare those two side by side. And suddenly we've got something that's more sort of dramatic to some extent. It's bringing the person forward. And there's a bit more kind of texture and shape, a bit more of a 3D qualities. The lights are still in the same position. I've changed the power slightly. I'll show you that in a minute. But we're either side of the camera still. We're pushing in with that light. But because we're putting the negative fill either side of them, we're just kind of boxing that in and adding some contrast and some shape. Let's look at what I've done with changing the light power. I've got 7.2 on this one. And I've got 4 on the other one, so like 70%, 40%. Let's look at them separately because that's quite helpful if you look at the preview image on the side. This is our main light, right? So it's 70%. It's kind of cleaning up everything on the image. Because it's silver again, it's working quite nicely with the texture, it's working with the quality of the skirt and so on. Let's take this one, put this as our solar light. So we brought it down to 40%, and this is just a fill light now. And it just helps us with the idea of the negative fill. Also, we get this kind of 3D quality, right? Let's look at it from above. You can see what that is. Nothing else has changed in here. Hopefully that all makes sense. So this is maybe where we can get a little bit creative and just get some more quality and some more depth to the image, right? So I've dropped one of the umbrellas down in terms of height. Pushed one right up to the ceiling so you can see that from the top. And then what I've done is I've brought the power back to being the same on each light. I've got 6.9, 70% on here, 70% on here. What I'm trying to show you now is the difference of when you're kind of stretching the light out, right? So you're pushing one light up, bringing one light down, you're sculpting again. If we look at the preview image, let's put this as our main light, and that's what we'd expect from the previous image. And then we're going to put this one as our main light, and we're pushing a bit of an uplight in here. Obviously, you'll notice now that the color of the light has changed. And I've put a gel on, I put a rose pink gel. Rose pink, I think, works with like the styling that's here in the set. I'm also using the gels quite a bit because it's really helpful to see what light is doing what. Also, gels are really great for when you're in a small space. I think with gels, you always have to be a little bit careful. It doesn't look kind of too homemade DIY, but gels can be really nice when they're used sort of delicately and softly. And obviously you can change that in the post-production. We've got this as a solar light with the gel on. And what's nice about this is because we're only gelling one light, but it's the fill light, the main light being that silver is going to kind of push most of that color away. So it's not going to become really obvious or sort of cheap looking. This is now seeing that as a solo, so we're just seeing that main key light coming in. And this is what I mean about like how subtle you can be with colors. So we've got both those lights as the same power. Only one of them is gelled. Take that back off the solo again. And because the light is lower down, that bit of an angle, it's not flooding the picture with a load of color gel. So it's not suddenly looking like really cheap and sort of quite basic. Spin around here, see what I mean with that. So it's just that bottom light that is gel, just this light. Even in the same power, we're kind of cleaning up the image with that top light, and then we're just filling in a little bit of gel light. And let's compare it to the previous one. So this was just the two silvers, but one was a little bit more dominant in power. Put them in the same power, put that pink gel light, and you can see it's just picking up the color of the sweater. It's just working with the color of the hair. And again, this is where I think like picking gels, you've got to be kind of fairly careful of what you're trying to do with the gel. I'm not trying to flood the image with color. I'm just trying to warm things up a little bit and sit in the right tone. And to me, it looks kind of nice. It's like quite a fresh setup. Silver now on the other side suddenly looks a little bit desaturated, right? So you can see the difference with adding that gel. And then the other thing I'm going to do is just play with the dominance of this. So with this one, let me just scoot around here so we can see the position doesn't change on the two umbrellas. That's really important to note. And we have previously 6.9, 6.9, but now we've got gels on both of them. So the same gel, the rose pink on both of them. We're flooding the image with color, and let's just compare the difference of those. So single gel from camera left, and then gels on both lights. It's not like super intense amount of color into the silver umbrella. It's not completely destroying the image with color. You can see also it's toning the black polyboards a little bit, but again, in post-production, you can kind of even that color out. You could just drain it out a little bit if you need to, or you can kind of pump it up. The other thing, when I move the two lights, right, so I move the one higher and one lower, I think it's got an interesting catch light in the eye, but again, just be aware like what you're doing with catch lights. Don't make them like super distracting. Obviously you could like post-production that out. I'll try and stop saying that now, but I don't want to just say, hey, solve this in post, but just be aware what your catch lights are doing. I think that's really helpful to know. Then let's say you don't have two lights that you can work with. What's a really simple setup with this? Let's keep everything the same, model position the same, the black negative fill is still the same, but I've brought my key light in. Let's see it here. Let's see where it's moved to here. And then I've got 6.3 because I've moved it in. I still got black silver. I've angled it up as much as I can, just creeping out the ceiling, but you can give or take a little bit. And I'm trying to push it down so it's shaping the face a little bit. Look at the preview image. Because it's a single light source, nice and clean catch light, nice highlight on the lips. That will always be there. That's great because you're up high, single silver umbrella. Fairly soft shadow under the jawline because you're still getting a bit of bounce. And the light itself is fairly soft. It's not like super hard like some of the lights that we'll look at later. You could again put like a soft pink back onto this as a gel if you want to. Let's compare these three images together. So you can suddenly see the difference of this wraparound quality of the two umbrellas as opposed to the single umbrella here. And again, thinking what you're trying to do, but in that simple, small studio space, you've suddenly got a lot of variety with really cheap accessories. And let's go back to if we've got an Octa now. So all I'm showing with this, got the two Octas. Let's just skip back so we can see what we're comparing. Initially we had the two silver umbrellas and I didn't show you the close-up shot of the Octa. So I've put the Octas on and they're still open. You can see at the front, they don't have the diffusion panel into them. We're having that wraparound quality of the light. We're shooting like a mid-length portrait shot. Fairly nice, consistent wrap light, quite soft, no super intense shadows anywhere. Quite pleasing on the face, nice shape on the jawline. Everything is good. Again, we're like a little bit overhead height, getting as high almost to the ceiling as we can. There's a little bit of space here. Then I'm separating them out. So like I did with the umbrellas, I'm just going to change what I'm doing with where my kind of main light is coming from or change the direction of the light. So I've got power of 4 on the top light and I've got 6 on the bottom light. I'm giving a bit of an uplight feel again just to give you the idea, okay, this is what happens if you want to play around with the lights. Uplight can like not be flattering sometimes, but it depends what the intent is behind it. Sometimes you can get some interesting shots with that. And if we look at the front, the Octas are still open. So we know they're kind of quite metallic, quite silvery. Let's compare the two on here just so you can see really what that uplight is doing. And you can see actually it's kind of shaping the face a little bit more. Uplight, obviously, you know, you need to be aware that you're kind of veering into like classic horror lighting, so be a bit careful with that. But again, it can shape quite nicely. Again, remember if you're like in a white studio, you could get uplight and then fill off the ceiling, but we could even that out if we want to by just putting more on the top light here rather than just having the bottom light is more powerful. So again, we have a little bit of variety. Then what I've done with these is I've put some gels on because it's interesting to see what you can play with the gels. They're still open. I don't have the diffusion panels in, I've just got the gel on. You don't need a huge piece of gel to do this. You could just wrap like the head of the light as well. Just be careful that you don't stick the gel onto the light. That could be kind of annoying. And depending on what your lights are, that could also be a risk to the actual bulb itself. You can get loads of different materials that will color the light, but just try and work with like safe gels if you can, like get them from like a photography supplier store would be helpful. We've got the blue at the top, we've got a red, I think it's quite a strong red, yeah, flame red at the bottom, and I've got 6 and I've got 5. So I'm pushing in a little bit more power with the red light. Let's see what that looks like. So the red light coloring the whole of the frame, and then I'm cooling it back down with the blue light from the top. Let's compare this to the previous one with the other uplight, and then this is the one obviously with the red gel. And we can see that red gel is like toning everything in the space. Let's look at them separately. If we look at the previous image with just the red, see how much that red is doing, completely coloring the frame, sort of almost unusable at this point. But then we're pushing back in with this blue light. Let's put solo light. Not a huge amount of power needed for that, but you can see it's just hitting the face, hitting the cheekbones, and doing all those good things that we know that this light is going to do. But then when we put them back on together, it begins to even out and smooths everything away from that red. If you watch the preview image on the side, I'm just going to put the power up, 6.5, and you can see suddenly it's washing the color out of the face, but keeping a little bit more of the color into, say, like the shadow that's around the hands, because it's the top-down light, right? If we had them at the same height, then obviously the colors would begin to kind of cancel each other out. But with that top light, it's cleaning the face, and maybe that's somehow a way to like concentrate when a viewer is looking. use that kind of cleaner light to emphasize what you want someone to look at. Now, maybe you don't have 2 octas, or maybe you've got some kit that you can kind of play around with. So now I've got 1 octa, and then I've got a reflector up here, but I put a grid on it. So I've got a grid number 3. We've talked about grids in other videos, but a grid obviously just narrows down like spread of the light. It's kind of like focusing the light, although there's not a lens in there. Directing the light probably is a better way to put it. So let's put this as a solo and look at the preview image on this side. So with the grid number 3, there's a couple of things that we notice with this. Hard shadow under the chin, because it is this reflector with a grid on it. So we know we're going to get hard shadow, quite contrasty. See that hard shadow under the hands. And then let's put this as a solo light. Again, that's exactly as we would expect it to be because it's the same as before. But when we put them on together, we get this nice clean light into the face, and then the red is on the rest of the frame. If we look at these together, this first one that's showing now is with the octa with the blue light, and then one on the right is with the grid with the blue light. And you can really see the difference of how a grid light can pull something forward. Suddenly this picture is all about like the face, right? So you can really emphasize where someone's looking in your frame. Super controllable with that grid of where the light is pushing, and then suddenly you get this real feeling of like warm and cool areas of the picture. It looks a lot more like blue in the top of the image because we're just pushing that light in and we're controlling where the spill of that light is. So again, something you can kind of play with in this space. The light right here is like right at the top of the ceiling, directly kind of pointing into the face pretty much of the model. Move it around. You can glance past with grids also. I've talked about that before. That's kind of helpful to do. The other thing to really notice with this, let's put it back on the solo light. See that fairly heavy shadow under the chin, looks kind of quite hard. What's interesting is that when I turn this off the solo light, if you see in the preview image here, because we're pushing that red gel light from the bottom, that shadow, instead of being like that hard dense shadow, turns into a nice red shadow. Look at that in a preview image. So suddenly you've got a shadow that's kind of interesting. The color is maybe a little too close to the background in this, but again, it just takes away that heaviness of the shadow by putting a gel light into the shadow. So toning and coloring those shadows can be kind of an interesting thing to do. What we could also do with this is emphasize the face even more. So I've got a grid number 1 now, so 10-degree grid. So it means that the beam of the light is even more narrow. So it's like focusing on the face a little bit more. I keep saying focusing, it's not a focus, but it's just narrowing that beam of light. So we're just hitting the face. Let's put this as a solo light. See in the preview image, the fall off of light to shade is much more like dramatic. This is about the face light. Take this off a solo, put our fill light back in. That's the same as it was previously. But if we compare those 2 images side by side, so this is the number 3 grid. See that light onto the face. We're trying to balance things a little bit. But then when we put it as a number 1 grid, see how much the face is coming forward. On this image here, I've got grid number 3 and power of 5, and then I've got grid number 1 and power 6.6. So really pulling the face forward. It's about like how much do you want to do that? Like how subtle or how strong do you want those changes in light to be? Sometimes the grids can look like very DIY home photography, but if you get a balance right, it can work really nicely. Got that really nice deep red to the shadow, and then the fall off of light across the body means that the rest of the frame kind of turns quite red. Again, be careful of what you're doing with like skin tones, but this is about toning the bottom half of the image. And then this one is about kind of bringing a bit more balance to the frame. Simple setup. Let's just look at that from the top so you can see where we are. We've got the open octa with no diffusion on the front. We've got that open grid. We've got the open reflector with the grid number 1, and it's aimed up high. So let's go to the next one. If I don't have an octa, or maybe I want to do something more dramatic and change things a little bit, maybe I could have 2 reflectors with grids on. Let's just pivot around. So we've got the same position as the octa was before, but I've got the open reflector now with a grid, and I've got a grid number 2. I think I have a grid number 1 still, yeah, and 6 on power. So they're fairly even and consistent, but because we're not having that big octa that's throwing light into the frame, we're getting like 2 areas of the picture that are lit. And we can see that in the, so we've got like the spread of the blue at the top and then the spread of the red at the bottom, and they're kind of beginning to meet in the middle. Let's compare that to say where the octa was. This is octa with the grid number 1 into the face, and then the one on the right still has a grid number 1 with the same power into the face, but you can see the difference of not having that octa in there. Suddenly this seems way more dramatic at the top because we're not getting some of that spill light from the octa that's filling into the frame, right? So we've got like almost 2 distinct areas that are lit, and then this one we're lighting the rest of the frame, and then we're pushing in that grid from the front. Grids can look kind of cheap, so be careful with them. But if you get the angles and things right, you can get something interesting. The other things to notice with this, look at the shadow under the chin. That seems way more pronounced because again, we're not getting that red gel from the octa that is filling in that shadow. So this is a stronger chin shadow here than it is on this side, because that other one was getting colored by the red gel from Octa. And let's just pivot around so you can see exactly where we are again. It's helpful to see what we've got. Let's just vary these grids. I have brought the angles out, so see from the top, pushed it right to the edge of the set on one side, the edge of the set on the other, and then I've put a black polyboard in here. The black polyboard's not going to kill a huge amount of spill because I've already got quite a tight cone of light, so I'm not getting light bouncing around as if I would with, say, the Octa. Let's just check the power, 6.6 and 8.3. Let's look at the bottom one first with the red gel. Look at the angle with this. I'm kind of pushing it down onto the floor and then it's hitting the back of the colorama as well. So we've got this sort of arc of light in the background. Let's put our top light as a solo. And we're shaping the face a little bit more. Because I brought it off to one side, it's working like with the shape of the face, putting a nicer shadow under the chin, or I think it's nicer because it's a more complete shadow. Again, angling grids can be really important in emphasizing face shape, but if we put them both on together, we get kind of a fairly strong image in terms of the way this is colored and shaped. Let's do that as a preview. This is the lights where they were fairly flat and kind of almost central to the camera in a straight line. And then we're just adjusting the angle of that. I quite like what the bottom light is doing with the red here. Because we're sort of pushing it down and past, we're getting almost like a silhouette edge to the body shape. Whereas before when we're pushing into the body, we were kind of flattening that off. So this is a little bit more dramatic. Again, you might look at it and say, well, my preference is the image on the left or the right. Just to show you can control things in a small space fairly well. Grids are super helpful for that. And then I've put a white polyboard in. Let's just see the difference, click between two. So it's just a black or a white. And then I'm angling this red light across. If you didn't see that, just watch the red light change. So the red light is now pushing into the background a little bit more directly. Let's compare those two. One on this side on the right is with the white polyboard. This one on the left is with the black negative fill. And I just want to show you with that you can begin to kind of still shape space, even if like it's a white wall on the side or a black wall, you can still shape with the grids because look, I'm pushing that red gel away and hitting the background. So I've got this kind of strong silhouette shape here. And it's actually stronger than when I've got the black negative fill on this side because I'm just angling it slightly away from the body. So you can kind of rake across with grid lights and it will work quite nicely. The light on the face is the same because nothing has changed. So dramatic lighting in a small space, totally possible. Let's change our kind of whole approach with this now and let's get something that has a maybe slightly softer feel to it. So my grid light is still the same. I've got grid number one, I've still got the blue gel onto it, but my white polyboard, I'm just pushing the light into it. Let's look from above. So you can see I'm just pushing it into this area here. And what I'm hoping it's going to do is like bounce back towards the model's face and it's just going to fill in one side. Let's have a look at that as a solo light. So this is just blue gel grid number one. You can see that it's pushing in, it's bouncing in, and it's giving us this really nice soft fill on the side of the face. It's giving us a distracting shadow on the off side of the face because the light is kind of bouncing past. Again, you could adjust that with where the model is looking. Or the other thing we could do is try and kind of push that away by putting a second light in. You can see we've toned that shadow with this red shoot-through umbrella or sock umbrella. Let's put this as a solo light, completely toning the whole image. Sort of unreadable at this point, but this is just a solo light. And we take them back off and we suddenly get something that's quite soft and fairly nice. We can really notice what that blue light is doing now in the way that it's kind of shaping the body and see it coming across the chest. That actually looks quite nice, quite kind of like sculpting. Let's look from the top so we can just see. Sock umbrellas are really great. They're super cheap to buy. They're really soft. It's like having a big softbox, but you can take the front off the umbrella if you want to, so it's not as soft and it's more of a direct, or you can bounce them. I think they're good pieces of kit to have. I've talked about them in loads of different videos now. They're great for bounce lights. This one does still have the red gel on it. Also, obviously that's important. So let's compare that to the two grid lights that we just had. On the left, the two grids. On the right, the shoot-through umbrella or sock umbrella, and then the bounce grid light into the white polyboard. I like what that light is doing on the face where it's kind of bouncing and coming back in. It's nice and soft. It's kind of pleasing. Again, you might think, well, there's way too much red in that. I don't want all of that red, and we could take that gel off if we wanted to. So this is the same setup, but I've just taken the red gel off. There's no gel on here. Let's just see what the power runs on that light. 7.4 before. I've taken the red gel off, so I'm going to bring the power of the light down, but also I want to bring it down because I want the dominant side to be that bounce light that's coming in from the back. Let's look at those two together, with the red gel and without the red gel. Again, depending on what you want to do. I like it with the red gel. I think having that kind of toned highlight is quite nice and it works quite nicely with the background. But again, just a little bit of variety. Let's look at this as a solo light, pushing in a little bit of fill at 4.7. Let me just bring that back up. You can see 6.5, we're beginning to kind of almost take over. Let's take that off as a solo. You can see there it's almost a little bit too flat now with that spill light that's coming in from the other side. And let's just put it back down again. And then we begin to kind of even things out. The other thing I can do with this one, I still got no gel on here. I brought this back up to 7. So this is like a fairly dominant light now because it was like 4.7 I think before, right? Let's put this as our solar light. You can see that's cleaning everything out in the image. Fairly soft light because it's going through that shoot through umbrella. And then here I've got rose pink. I put this on full power because it's rose pink, but it's bouncing into that polyboard, and then it's bouncing back into the face. So you can see that direction that's coming across. Put that as a solo light, be toning the whole image, and that would be like way too strong or way too distracting. But when we put that main key light back in, it's killing that gel light from the front and just allowing the gel into the background. Let's look at those 3 actually. So this is when we've got a red gel on the shoot through umbrella as well. Then we've got no red gel on the shoot through umbrella, and then we've got no red gel on the shoot through umbrella, pink gel onto the grid. And it's a kind of subtle toning that gives another feeling of shaping. Let's look at that as just the single image. So if you look at, say, the shadow here, where it's got that pink gel, it's quite nice in the way it's shaping the nose. It's quite nice with that little highlight that's putting down across the body on the roll neck, and it's not too strong. Works quite well with the color of the hair, obviously. Let's take those things out. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring our grid over here. We've still got the rose pink, about 8. So let's put this as a solar light, pushing it in. This is like if you've got an on-camera flash and you've just literally put like a gel over the front of it. That like Lomo style that was like really popular for a while. Kind of interesting as a single image, but when we take it off the solo, now I've put this shoot through umbrella back on. It's got no gel on it. It's a 7, matching pretty much the angle and the height of the grid light, and it cleans everything up. So this is comparing from the bounce light into the poly and then the more straight light with the gel. So you can see with the straight light for the gel, it's kind of coloring the whole of the image and it's coloring the background a little bit. But then when the Octa comes back on, the Octa sort of cleans up this side. But what I think is interesting, quite nice about this is like the gel is working nicely with the hair, so that color doesn't wash out. It's a little bit washed out on this side because we know we're just bouncing into the polyboard. It's toning the rest of the skin. If you were to looking like detail at this eye, for example, it's got a little bit of that pink gel and it's quite nice. Whereas this one, you've got maybe like a little bit of a cool light and then you've got a pink on this side, and that may be like too distracting. Let's just look at the setup again so we can see what it is. So up high, grid light with a gel on it. And that's the grid number 1 again. Power around 8 on here. I'm going to make a slight change on this one. So I'm going to angle the grid up a little bit. I put it on power 9. You can see where it is with this, right? So it's kind of pushing past, if you follow this line, it's pushing past the model's head. So we're going above, right? And we've got that like shadow draw line, but you can see where the shadow is from behind, that light is high and it's kind of clipping and it's away from the model. Turn that off as a solo light. And let's look at our shoot through umbrella. So before I think it was on like 7.9, something like that. Let me just check, 7. So I'm taking like 1 stop out of this. So I'm putting it on 6. Let's look at it as a solo light. A little bit directional because we're coming from one side. And then we're pushing in from this more dominant light from the top that's kind of skimming across the model's face. Let's look at those side by side. And so this is the one where obviously we're pushing more power in with that pink. We're lifting it up a little bit in terms of height. It's toning the top half of the image quite nicely, but then we're cleaning everything up the Octa. Again, what is your preference with this? It seems to me to sit together quite nicely. And I think this is where it's about experimenting, because I quite liked what this was doing earlier. But then I thought, well, actually, if I put a little bit more power, angle it up, I'm going to flood the top of the frame with the pink so everything holds together, and then I can clean it up with the Octa. Let's compare all 3 of those. So that was the side light with the pink, straight on with the pink, and then straight on with the pink, but up high and a little bit more power. Big difference between those when you compare them side by side. Controlling that space quite nicely. So again, like, what is your preference to those? What are you trying to do with the image? The thing that we know with grids is great. We're not going to get a lot of spill light. It's not going to flood around the space. So let's move away from those for a minute. Let's move away from gels. And I've got 2 now sock umbrellas, no gel, 6 on power, 6.5 on power. So just a tiny bit of difference between the 2 lights. But then the thing that's really important here is the angle. So I'm up high and angling down, and then I'm down low and I'm angling up. Look, let's look at them as solar lights. Got that up light, but it's not super drastic here because the power is down a little bit. It's not like a really strong horror light. And then look at the top down light here, 6.5, shaping the face, putting a nice line under the chin. That's all good. See them together, and we get like a fairly smooth, consistent, fairly soft light. I put the black polyboard in here just because I want to control a little bit of bounce off the wall And I want to give the feeling that this top light is a little bit more dominant. If I took that away, I would get a little bit more bounce and things would soften off. So this little edge here would disappear. Let's have a look at that. Quite a nice shape, quite soft, a little bit of sculpting quality because I've got the black polyboard, that negative fill, and then my uplight is a little bit lower power. So I'm really lighting from the top and lighting across the body. And let's keep everything the same. Just going to change the color of the backdrop. So we get a real sense of what the colors are doing. Power's the same on both the lights. Angle's still the same on the lights. Still got the negative fill in. You can see how soft that light is. You could almost like get away with like ecom kind of lighting for this, right? Or like product photography. Because I'm not getting like a heavy shadow on one side. I'm not getting anything that's too distracting that I've got to like cut out in post-production. Shaping the face quite nicely. If this was like a little bit too hard here, if I think it's too contrasty, I could take the black polyboard out. I could put a bit more power in the light that's coming from down below, for example. It's really super soft. I like what's happening under the jawline. All good, just with my two shoot-through umbrellas. If you want to go in the other direction and make something like super dramatic, then I've got two snoots here. So a snoot is like kind of like having a grid, essentially, but we're really directing and pushing light almost like through a straw. I bought one at the beginning because like I like the effect. I think a lot of photographers fall into like buying snoots early on. But they're kind of interesting. They're good to have as like a backup because it's accent light. Let's see what we're doing with the back. So I've got it 7.8. Let's put it as a solo light. And you can really see I'm just making like some dramatic like hair lighting. Shaping, sculptural. It's kind of nice to just add form and shape. And then I'm going right straight on into the face with this one, angling it down a little bit. So it's a little bit above camera height, but not like right up to the ceiling. I've got an orange gel on here. Let's put it as a solo. Super clean light. Heavy shadow under the chin. And I'm gelling everything, so I'm not like having some highlight that's going to burn out too much. Let's take it off as a solo and put them back together and see what we've got here. So I'm playing like a red, pink, and an orange together. You have to be careful, like, you know, color theory. I have a video on color theory if you want to look at that. But depending on like, do you want to have color contrast? Do you want to have colors work in harmony? Do you want something to clash? The pink obviously is toning pink hair, so that's kind of nice. Also, but it's just to play around with gels and what we know the snoot is going to add this like big circle onto the wall, but the fall off is kind of nice with that depending on what your framing is. But you could do something a little bit stronger. So my camera position hasn't changed much throughout this. I think I'm still on the 85mm lens. So because I got dramatic lighting, maybe I could just make something more dramatic with the image. So I've stuck a 24mm super wide angle in here, and then I've changed my camera position so I'm like down low and shooting up into the model. And then I've still got these two snoots together. Let's compare those two. So suddenly this one maybe looks kind of a little flat and boring. Then with the super wide angle, maybe there's something interesting there. Again, what do you want to do? Like, you can play around with things in your studio, and I think this angle works quite nicely in terms of like shadow and contrast. If you're playing with like snoots and grids, just be really aware, what are your shadows doing? Are they helping the picture? Is the shadow like the point of the picture, which can work quite nicely in something like this. It's kind of fun, dramatic, maybe a bit promo image. Let's just look at the background, right? This is all on the red colorama, but what if I don't have red? I don't have budget to buy more coloramas. Let's have a white colorama here, and then I've got my red gel, and then I've got a blue gel. Put the blue as a solo, obviously, just a blue circle, we'd expect that. And then let's put the red as a solo, a red circle, obviously, we'd expect that. Take them back off. And then we're getting something nice that's meeting in the middle. If you have three lights, you could get white in the middle by working with the color spectrum. So you can see we've got like red circle at the back, blue on the other side. Something interesting that's happening here. We've got some dramatic shadow. I feel like don't get stuck into the idea that gels are going to solve everything, but you can do some interesting effects with. Let's bring that angle back so it's more like a portrait and see the difference between those two. I prefer the slightly more like dramatic feel of this. But the other things to notice, right? We're in essentially like a white studio with a black ceiling and a white background, but actually it doesn't give that feeling, right? We're allowing everything to fall off into dark, into shadow. That's good. We've got strong color. We've got no white essentially in there. Let's look at our space again to see, haven't changed anything else on here. So we're not getting all that light bouncing around. Super controllable. Let's change it up, and we're gonna work with a beauty dish. Beauty dishes are great. I've talked about those in previous videos. This is just a super normal standard beauty dish, nothing else happening. I've got the blue gel on here because I'm just keeping that in a minute to show the difference. And then I've got my snoot. Let's look at the image. The beauty dish is the blue gel, so that's pushing light all across the frame. And the snoot's coming in and just putting color into the top half. So let's just compare two snoots, and this is snoot and beauty dish. Immediately you see a huge difference when we're working with the beauty dish. I feel it looks immediately like a little bit more like editorial. That might be a stretch to say that, but you know what I mean? It looks a little bit less DIY. Let's see also what we can do with that if we vary how we're working with the beauty dish. So let's look at it here. It was like really far back, right? Let's use the beauty dish for what it's actually kind of meant to be, pushing it in close to the body. It can go a lot closer than this, but now we're about like shaping the face. So let's put this as our solo light first of all. Not super intense shadow, fairly soft, really good on skin, shaping the face quite nicely. And then I'm just pushing in with a reflector. I don't have a grid on it. It's just an open face. See that as a solo light. And I've got flame red on here. So let's look at it as a solo light, and it's just throwing loads of light in, obviously into the image. We'd expect that. Not really a readable image for your sensor too much there. But then when we take it off solo and we're pushing in with that beauty dish, actually we've got something that I think looks really, really nice and really interesting. Let's just see the solo light of the beauty dish again. See that spread of the beauty dish that's hitting the top of the frame? When we take it off the solo light and put them back in together, we've got something that has this like really nice editorial feel to it. We're shaping, we're coloring all of those shadows with that red gel. Because we've got a reflector this time, but it's open, the light is just bouncing around everywhere. So suddenly all of our shadows that would be really dark and intense are filled with this really nice red light. And then we're cleaning up the rest of the image with the beauty dish. The face looks great here. The skin would look great. We know that because beauty dish is really great for that sort of makeup feel also. And then we just got these soft filled shadows. Let's look at these three. We're really changing the space and feel of the images that we're making. We're changing the idea of like where we're looking in the frame, the controllability of it. Snoot and beauty dish and open reflector. So again, these are like fairly cheap pieces of equipment. Beauty dish is maybe the most expensive of all of them, but you can really control the space. Let's just look at this one more time as a solo, so you definitely know what I mean with that. Completely flooding everything in the frame, right? It's just bouncing around everywhere, filling the frame. Looks unusable, but when we take it off and put the beauty dish back in, we get something that's nice and considered. Now let's compare it without the gel. So I've taken that gel off the reflector. Let's compare those side by side. So this is suddenly like a little flat, a little boring. The shadows don't look so great. Suddenly you can hopefully see the benefit of using that gel on the reflector. Super useful, nice little setup. Let's go in tighter now, as if we're actually almost shooting a bit more of a beauty look. Spin around. So we're back on 85mm lens, but we're in close. We're shooting down and we're going to like compress the features a little bit. Classic beauty feel. I could get closer with this, but I'm not like doing an actual like pose beauty shot. I've got my beauty dish from the top. You can see it's really angled down. Super pleasing in terms of the shape on the face. It's like contouring the face. That's great. That's what we want. And then on this side, I've got grid number 2 on my reflector, and I'm pushing like a bit of an uplight just to sort of even things out. So fairly clean. So it's not perfect at this point, but we could begin to refine that and think actually, like even in a small space like this, you can shoot beauty if you want to, or like really stylized like headshots. The power is super low, reflected with the grid on. I'm now just gonna put a pink gel on. Let's have a look at those side by side. The pink gel does a huge amount of work here. It sits in a really nice register with the sweater. It really warms up the underneath of the neck, that shadow area. Puts really nice like contouring shape here. So this suddenly just looks a little bit like kind of boring to me. As I put that pink in, you can see the pink is hitting here. It's hitting underneath like the fringe. It's putting a little bit more color into the lips. So you can use gels in a fairly subtle way in a small space, even though this gel is like firing almost directly into the model. Let's look at it as a solo light. And again, this is on a white backdrop, right? Very subtle use here. If we like what that's doing, maybe we don't want like such a direct light so close to the model. We could put the Octabox on. Let's look at those two. So you can see it's a little bit uplighty here. If we put the Octa on, it's less noticeable in terms of its uplight, but maybe it's not like hitting underneath here. I quite like what it's doing here in the shape of the neck, for example. Again, if we're looking at like how do we transform the space and what variety can we have, let's just change this colorama to a rose pink. We know we've got like rose pink gels, and this is about like, you know, planning ahead. What are you trying to do? The pink styling, the pink hair, the pink light, pink colorama. Actually, you can get something that's quite considered in a small space. Beauty dish is still the same. Compare those two. So the small difference of the like pink colorama, again, suddenly gives like a different like editorial feel. So just changing our background to pink colorama, again, gives us a nice feel to this. If we wanted to shape the face, like let's say we wanted to shape here, we could change the angle of the beauty dish a bit more, or we could bring a black polyboard. So see here on the preview image, we could bring a black polyboard, say to this side, like a negative fill. Again, what I'm doing with this one, I've got 7.6 on my light, standard beauty dish, nothing is changing. And then I've got 5.6 and I put a grid on a beauty dish. Grids are super helpful for beauty dishes. Again, they're just going to narrow down that beam of that light. And if we look at those side by side, big things to notice. The light from the beauty dish is not hitting the background now. So we've got deep cherry red instead of a pink, like a rose pink. Taking that power down again on the beauty dish. Look what's happening here in the sweater. This sits together quite nicely. It looks less lit in some way, but the face still looks good. Sculpting the face, giving some depth and form to it. The hair looks quite nice. Just see what we've changed here. Let's just look at 2 images. It was a little bit more top down before. I flattened it off, but I don't want so much to hit the background, so I've turned the power down. So it's 5.6 now. Previously it was 7.6. 2 stops of light. We're in home straight now. If you've watched all the way through so far, you should give yourself an award. Now what we're gonna do is just quickly look at like, how do we make something really soft? What can we do in the way of diffusion panels? So I've got like a 2 meter by 1 meter diffusion panel. It's like a half stop. So I'm pushing light through it. But even if you can't afford like diffusion panels, other things can work, like a shower curtain. Like if you get like a translucent, no color, but like a white translucent shower curtain, you could hang it from the ceiling. Super easy, gonna cost you like no money at all to do that. And you can push light through it. Tracing film can be quite cheap. But obviously like if you can get diffusion, that's great. And they're really cheap Elastilite versions and stuff. But I wanted to make something really, really soft. So let's see what this light is here. I've still got my Octa, I've still got my pink on it. Let's put it as a solar light. Really, really soft light. You can see in the preview image, it's a little bit of an uplight, but it's not like super uplight. I've still got my beauty dish with the grid. I'm kind of coming across with an angle. Let's put this as solar light. And now we're like raking across the face again. See that angle here? Hopefully that's easy to see. So I'm like really pushing across. I like the way the light is moving across the cheek. It's great. I like the way it's hitting the nose. Let's take that back off solar light. And we've got something that I think is kind of soft and beautiful. Let's compare the previous two. If you look at the preview image up here in the top right, see how the lights move, just pulling one back and pulling the beauty dish around to one side, and then really softening off by pushing it through that diffusion panel. And previously we had 4.9 and 5.6. And then as I pull it back in Octa, I'm putting more power in the light, so 7.2. I think it works nicely, super soft in a small space. If you wanted less difference between the two sides, then we could put a white bounce board in here if we wanted to. We could bring this beauty dish round a little bit more so it's less angle from one side. We could put a little bit more power in the Octa, but again, we don't want to like loads of light bouncing around necessarily. Let's say you don't have a beauty dish, you've just got your Octas that we started off with. I'm bringing my Octa round. I've got no gel on here, 50% power. Nothing else is changing in the image. Let's look at those two side by side. So this is a beauty dish and this is the Octa. Things to notice straight away, beauty dish with that grid on it, not so much light is hitting the backdrop, but with the Octa, more light is hitting the backdrop. But the good part of that is that we get a little bit more light on this side of the face. So we're getting some light that's bouncing off the wall maybe and coming back, but also we've got this larger light source because it is the Octa, so it's going to wrap around the face. So we've got a little bit more of an even exposure on the face. Still, there is a fall off from light to shade, but it's maybe not as dramatic as we've got here. If you look at the shadow on the nose, it's a little bit harder on the beauty dish, and it's a little bit softer maybe on the Octa, or at least it reads that way to the eye. The other thing I could do to get a little bit more emphasis now is I could pull that Octa back a little bit, angle it down again. Here I'm on 4.8, here I'm on 4.8, nothing else is changing, but I'm just changing the angle of it. So let's look at those two. That's closer, and a little flatter, and then this is pulled back and a little bit more angled down, and you can see that I'm getting a bit more consistency in terms of the exposure on this side and this side. Just to recap what we've got, super soft light because it's Octa pushing through a diffusion panel, so really soft again, and then we've got a super soft light again because it's the Octa, but I'm also a little bit further away, so I'm beginning to kind of match the exposure on both sides. See, that's a solo, see exactly what it's doing, and then this wasn't solo. This one is coloring the whole image, and then this one is taking that color out on the side that we want to, and you can see it's just cleaning everything up. Really soft light in a small space. If I want to make it even softer, I could just throw in a little reflector here. Any kind of white surface is going to work well for that, but again, like a pop-out reflector you can get from a photo store would be great. A small adjustment makes a big difference. All of this here is from the bounce light from the reflector. Let me flick between them two like this so it's more obvious. So big difference that reflector makes. Again, we're just catching this light from the beauty dish and we're bouncing it back up into the body. If I don't want to have the uplight, I've still got space here to bring this Octa up, so it's almost up to the ceiling. Let's compare this image. So the two Octas together, octa with a reflector, and then 2 octas, no reflector, but we've raised that octa up so it's a little bit higher. Look how like warm and soft that image is. See it on its own. Really nice, soft, fairly non-directional light, just with our 2 light sources and our big diffusion panel. Nice catch lights in eyes. This would work no matter where the model turns their face to because it's not a harsh, strong light. Be good on skin. Works really well with like the tones and the fabric and the color. Again, just remember that it's up high and further back. That's the one with the pink on it. See that as a solo light. It's still coloring everything in the image, and then put this as a solo, and that's the one that's like cleaning out the gel light from the face. And when we see them together, we get a nice soft warm pink feeling to the shadows, but it's not super strong in terms of its color. And then last thing I'm going to do, turn this octa around. I'm going to bounce it into my diffusion panel. Let's just put this as a solo light. That's what we'd expect. Super soft, it's fine. It's coloring the whole image with the pink gel. Everything is okay with that. No problems there. And then I'm moving this other octa to behind the model. So I'm putting this like halo light across the hairline and across the shoulders. See exactly what I'm doing with that. Oh, also I moved this diffusion panel slightly off the ground, right? So again, if it's on a stand here, pushing the light into that, it's bouncing back to the model. Looking at this background octa, just putting this nice halo, but not super strong behind the model. And let's compare those two. So that was a really soft, like pulled back octa. And then this is our like halo light that's coming from the back. And then our bounce from the front. Different feel immediately. We're not getting so much light from the octa hit the background, so we've got a much deeper red here, and the sweater reads more red because we're not throwing so much light into it. An interesting starting point. What we could do is then put a lot more power in. So this is 4.8. Let's just put this really strong. So I'm going to put it on 9. I'm going to put the power up on this one as well. Look at this as a solo. I've deliberately overexposed this just so you can see exactly what it's doing. This is just a solo light now. So this octa, the light is obviously hitting the hair and shoulders, which we can see. But it's also going to be bouncing off the floor. It's going to be bouncing off this diffusion panel and back into the model. It's going to bounce off the walls. You can see it's bouncing kind of everywhere, coming back into the frame and lighting up this area of the model. Let's put this as a solo light. And then our fill light, which is the pink, hasn't really changed at this point. Take them off together. So background light was fairly low power and the background light was really strong. This is a midway point just to show you what that background light is doing, because obviously there's like unnatural kind of shadows and awkward lighting happening. So we need to kind of even out what's happening on our face, like clean up the face a little bit. Like this is awkward, or this like stray light around the nose and the shadow under the nose. So what we need to do is change that front light, this one here, that's bouncing into the diffusion panel, 8.5 on the power. Now I'm going to change this angle, bring it up to the ceiling. I'm going to put 10 on here because I want it to bounce back down and fill everything in the frame. Let's see those side by side. So messy kind of lighting, looks kind of awkward here. And then when I'm bouncing it down, everything is super soft and nice again. Really clean on the face. The pink is toning the face nicely. The separation, the difference between the background light and the face doesn't look really awkward, whereas in this one it looks really awkward, right? You can see it's way too strong here in terms of how we're reading it with the front of the image, but with this one we're reading it quite nicely. That background light is 6.4 on here, and it's 9 on this one. So we've evened things out. Let's just scoot around and see that again. So really small space, super controllable light. You can get really easy things to bolt onto the ceiling with lights. But again, a really nice, simple setup here. So we've got this really soft lighting feel. And all of that in this tiny set space. Let me just pick a couple of my favorite ones that I quite like on here. I really like these soft lighting, so I'm gonna pick some of these ones. So we've got 3 fairly strong setups here that work quite nicely, I think, give you quite controllable image. I think this image works quite nicely for me. So there's a huge amount of different setups that we can do. And obviously keep in mind, the model pose is always the same on this and styling is always the same. But there's quite a bit of variety. Clean, simple, straightforward portraits, great skin tone, and we know that with the 2 silvers that are pushing in with those umbrellas. We've got nice toned here, but this is where we're shooting into those negative fills with the polyboards. We're doing something interesting with the grids. We've got these super soft lights here. We've got this gelled shadow here, but still soft light onto the face. And then we've got these like dramatic grids. A lot that you can learn from. You could do all these setups in one day and just learn as you're going. The idea is obviously try one of these setups, practice with it, see what you like, and move on to the next one. And understand like it's about experimenting and playing with the light. Maybe you've got a small studio space, you've got 2 lights, you don't know what to do with them. You can just get some modifiers and some gels and then someone that's going to come and work with you. And you can do some interesting things. You could shoot like a whole editorial look like this. You could shoot beauty. You could shoot fun like portraits of your friends. There's like quite a lot of scope and range, I think, with this setup. So hopefully that was helpful. If you've got questions or something specific you didn't understand, just let me know in the comments. You can also request certain things in the comments or the TikTok. I won't guarantee I'll be able to do it, but I will try my best. And thanks for watching as always.